Oh, hi guys. Don't mind me, I'm just chilling out with my various Xenoblade Chronicles merchandise and items. You ever just wanna sit and chill with your favorite video game? I'm gonna be honest with you, I have no idea what I was trying to do with this intro. There are 3 things that you need to know about me before you truly know me. I visit Chipotle nearly every day, I hate socks with sandals, and Xenoblade Chronicles is the best game ever and you should play it right now. Okay, seriously. Xenoblade Chronicles is my favorite game of all time. It was nothing short of a life-changing experience that holds a special place in my heart and is the main reason that video games are such a huge passion for me today. I mean, hell, my entire channel is named after the game, and you know that blonde-haired dweeb I use in most of my thumbnails? No, not that one. That's actually the game's main protagonist, Shulk, my favorite video game character. Why do I harbor this unhinged love for Xenoblade? Well, young ones, let me sit you down and tell you a story of yore. A tale of wonder, passion, and weariness that just resulted in a teenage boy shutting himself off from society for an entire week, where he quite literally woke up, played a game, and fell back asleep for an entire 7 days straight. It was the scorching hot summer of 2012, and a 16-year-old Zach was losing passion in video games as a medium. It was at a time when the Wii, the last console he truly cared about, was at a point of surviving on life support. The Wii U was on the horizon, but it was looking bleak and barren, and the entire library of PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 games were oversaturated with generic, gritty military shooters. There was truly nothing to look forward to. Overwrought with media propaganda and pressure from my peers, I was growing skeptical of gaming as a hobby. Was I too old for it? I had lost the passion for the games that I loved to play, and nothing new was interesting me. The spark that kept me a gamer for my entire life was dying, and nothing was alleviating it. Perhaps I had to move on to more mature activities. Just as I was about to hang up the towel to search for new hobbies, I read up about a new game that came up for the Wii, Xenoblade Chronicles. It was touted as the swan song of the Nintendo Wii, with a lot of critics calling it one of the greatest RPGs of all time. What a fitting way to end my life as a gamer, I had thought. The swan song for the last console I truly cared for could be the swan song for my childhood hobby. So I went to pick it up from GameStop with tepid expectation and a somber outlook. I plopped it into my Wii, and after about an hour in, and during the game's first major plot twist, the moment that gripped me to it, the moment that had reignited my love for video games, had commenced. And the rest was history. I could gush over Xenoblade Chronicles all day. In fact, I will. Xenoblade was ultimately a special and phenomenal game because of how immersive its world and characters were, and how engrossing its combat was. Despite being released on the sub-HD Wii, the game still managed to use its unique art style to look stunning, with vistas of landscapes that showed the uniqueness and vibrancy of each biome in the game. Sure, it's not a graphically intensive game, and some of the character models and animations look like they could be on an early PS2 game, and not something in 2011, but the game easily made up for it with the beauty of its art style and sleek presentation. The game's main setting being on the bodies of 2 dead titans is one that's already inherently different from any other, but that, coupled with its various areas, makes exploring a fresh experience. Areas like a mechanical graveyard, a lush plain, a foggy marsh, and a snowy mountain region all have this beautiful presence to them that is pure eye candy. The game's musical score easily ranks among one of the best of all time, with emotional orchestral ballads and tracks that complement the mood of each plot moment perfectly. These tracks emit a visceral emotional reaction that are pure bliss. When confrontation with the enemy plays, you can't help but get pumped for the ensuing battle. The second that While I Think comes on, you know you'll be coming to a heart-wrenching plot point, and we can't go without mentioning the feeling of freedom that the legendary Gower Plains theme gives the moment that you hear it. I mean, just listen to this stuff, it's awe-inspiring. Every one of the main cast of characters was written and performed eloquently. They just bloomed of personality in a way that can only be described as iconic. The entire main party, from Shulk, Ryan, Charlotte, Ricky, and a few others who I won't name, were all memorable, believable, and had goals and lives that truly made the player care about seeing their stories out till the end. Their voice acting was stellar too, which is something that almost every RPG struggles with. Shulk especially has a mind-blowingly excellent English VA. Seriously, huge props to Adam Howden for being one of the best video game voice actors ever. He brings Shulk to life in a way that few others could. In the opening hour, when Shulk sees his childhood friend die before his very eyes, he screams, "I'll kill you," to the perpetrator, and it still sends shivers down my spine hearing it today. The story would be far too long for me to cover in depth, but believe me when I say that it's an emotional roller coaster. The plot essentially revolves around Shulk going around the body of the Titan he lives on in order to find the killer of his lifelong friend and love interest Fiora. His killer was a gigantic creature known as a Mechon, an inhabitant of the neighboring Titan, the Mechonis. The Mechon feed off of the humanoid characters, the Homs, and Shulk hopes to figure out why on his journey. On top of its stellar plot and characters, the game's action RPG combat system is filled with a depth that puts nearly every other contemporary RPG to shame. The game uses an art system where the damage of a majority of your moves are based on the character's position. An example, a move like backslash does more damage from behind an enemy. Certain moves can also apply certain effects onto enemies that can be chained together. While the break status does nothing on its own, coupled with a move that inflicts topple, it will send an enemy falling to the ground. Some characters only had access to moves that would inflict break, whereas others only had attacks that would topple. This separation of moves created this fluid, teamwork-based dynamic to the gameplay. Shulk also had the ability to see in the future, letting you warn teammates of what enemies could do next. Your party can also inflict moves called chain attacks together that reset all ability cooldowns and allowed each party member to attack an enemy in succession. On top of this, you needed to often time button presses for attacks in order to maximize their damage. All of these mechanics working together at once created a combat system that constantly kept the player engaged and attentive. A far cry from most RPGs where the bulk of the gameplay normally equates to press a button and then watch an animation play. Needless to say, Xenoblade Chronicles holds a special place in my heart and still stands as the best game I've ever played. On top of that, it's a pretty damn good game in general. It's a huge experience that immerses you in a way that very few games can. It's iconic, it's unforgettable, it's truly a magnum opus of video games. So when the news that Xenoblade 2, a direct sequel to Xenoblade Chronicles, was on the horizon on the Nintendo Switch, my entire world erupted. My mind was blown. I never thought that it could happen. We had received a spin-off title on the Wii U dubbed Xenoblade Chronicles X that was good, but not nearly as amazing as the original Xenoblade. With less of a focus on the story and characters, little improvements to gameplay, and an underwhelming soundtrack and mediocre voice acting, it was a fun experience, but it definitely wasn't the game that I held such high regards to before. I, among many others, had assumed that Xenoblade Chronicles was a one-and-done thing, that a game like Xenoblade X, whose main draw was its open-world exploration, was expected to be the future of the series. I was never expecting to see a title in the vein of the original Xenoblade again. When Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was announced to be released at the end of the year, I was ecstatic. Just with the name Xenoblade 2, we knew that the development studio, Monolith Soft, were not fucking around. By naming it Xenoblade 2, they established it as a direct sequel to the original and announced X as a spin-off. They acknowledged that the original Xenoblade was this title that held a certain quality and pedigree that Xenoblade X couldn't match. They acknowledged that Xenoblade had a special trait that made it deserving of a direct sequel. I was eagerly anticipating this title above anything else, and consumed any piece of information that I could before it would be in my hands. But the more I learned and the more I saw, the less excited I became. I started noticing flaws that were all too apparent. It was exactly like the Xenoblade I knew and loved, but something was off. and it's gotten to the point now where I really feel like I have to get something off of my chest. Guys, I'm not too sure about Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Now, I'm trying to reserve judgment for when the game comes out, but I can't help but notice some of the game's glaring warts thus far. I want to express my concerns now, before it's too late. What made the original Xenoblade Chronicles stand out was its stellar quality. It was a game that was made amazing and immersive because of how well presented its characters were, and Xenoblade 2 seems to be taking a few steps back in those regards. Xenoblade 2's trailers thus far have shown some subpar and almost cringe-inducing voice acting. I mean, just take this side-by-side of Shulk and Xenoblade 2's new main character Rex screaming at an enemy.
I'll kill you! Take this!
It may seem a little silly to be pointing out the flaws in something like voice acting, but Xenoblade's VA work was one of the things that made it stand above so many other RPGs. At its best, it was emotionally moving, and at its worst, it was passable enough to draw you into the moment. On the other hand, Xenoblade 2's voice acting, at best, seems to be standard quality for most low-budget localization, and worst, so garishly out of place that it takes you out of what should be an immersive, emotional moment. It's a minor thing, but it's one that I hope isn't reflective of the entire experience. This leads into another issue I have with Xenoblade 2, the character design. The design of each of the characters that we know of seems to be less original and lacks inspiration compared to those of its predecessor. Though we haven't come across their personality or writing yet, so I'm still reserving judgment of if these characters are interesting or not. In terms of their physical presence though, they mostly seem to be on the more generic side. One of the main characters, Pyra, looks like she was built to appease the crowd of people who clamber for scantily clad waifu characters and nothing more, which outright just feels shallow. This fan service-y type character never really existed in Xenoblade, and it was something that was refreshing for someone like me who's fatigued with the trope being far too present in modern storytelling. Having her be an essential character, and one who was designed that way, makes the game feel like it's losing sight of something that made the original Xenoblade so unique. Rex, the new main character, looks alright, but I'm personally not a fan of his lighthearted demeanor and goofy aesthetic. What made Shulk stand out as a protagonist was that he was the unlikeliest of unlikely heroes. He was a softly spoken, nerdy, intelligent scientist with a strong moral compass and a scrawny physique. Rex's archetype, on the other hand, is one of the goofy, aloof, lighthearted hero, which is overplayed in most anime and games. Nia is probably the character I have the most knee-jerk reaction to, and it's honestly a bit unfair to her. I just hate anthropomorphic animals and furries personally, and I think that they're needlessly overdone in anime and are often reflective of lazy character design. Her issue is more of a personal preference, but it's another example of this game seemingly losing some of its uniqueness. With all of the hallmarks of generic anime presentation, from the waifus to the goofy heroes and furries, it takes some of the spirit away from what made the original Xenoblade special. That game introduced us to unique species like the Nopon and the Hyentia. While some of those are still here, all of the new character designs just seem lifeless in comparison. The facial animations seem to be rather poor thus far too. While the original Xenoblade also had some odd-looking faces, that game had the excuse of being on the Wii and still managed to mask it well. Xenoblade 2 was on the shiny new Nintendo Switch though. It shouldn't really look as plastic and dull as it does. Some of the ways in which characters' mouths move doesn't even really line up with what they're saying. Even some of the body animations look a little gross. Again, a minor gripe, but it's something that takes me out of the game's immersive experience. It reminds me that the world is fake and draws me away from the relationships I have with it. What about the gameplay, you may ask? Well, it's similar to the original Xenoblades, but with some questionable changes. At its core, it seems to be like Xenoblade's combat system, but just more of it. Though more doesn't always mean better. Adding in the ability to change weapons, allowing auto attacks to combo naturally, removing the ability to move and attack at the same time, and creating new secondary abilities in general seems a little overwhelming at first glance. I would have liked to see more practical changes to the combat system, instead of just having them add new layers and mechanics to the already established system. While I love the engagement that Xenoblade Chronicles combat gave me, I fear that if its sequel tries to manage too many things at once, it might become too much to handle. All of these changes that I've noticed in Xenoblade 2 have begun to add up. The voice acting, the odd character design, and the questionable combat differences have me a bit wary of it. I'm fearful that while Xenoblade 2 may keep the core structure of what I loved in the original, it will ultimately be a lower quality and more generic experience. I'm just afraid that it won't grip me in the way that the original did. I love Xenoblade. It's my favorite game of all time. I want to be able to say the same for Xenoblade 2, but with all that stands thus far, I'm not sure if that will be the case. At the risk of already sounding like an old man, I want to leave you with this statement. I want a sequel to deliver an experience that is leaps and bounds better than what we were given before. When Monolith Soft showed us Xenoblade 2, a direct sequel to my favorite game ever, I was happy because there was some unspoken mutual understanding. They knew what I and many others loved about Xenoblade and decided to recreate it. In fact, they wanted to give it a glorious return. They brought the same team that worked on the musical score back. They returned to the Titan setting, varied biome motif, and linear story focus. But they're bringing that back without the leap in quality that a sequel needs, and that just makes us all uncertain. Okay, never mind, this is gonna be the greatest game ever.